This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As more details emerge about the deadly January 6th insurrection and how Donald Trump and his allies plotted to overturn the 2020 election, we begin today's show with Congressmember Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland. Raskin serves on the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack. He was the lead manager in the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump following the insurrection. Congressmember Raskin was inside the House January 6, as were his daughter and son-in-law, when Trump supporters attacked the Capitol. The January 6th insurrection came at a tragic moment for the Raskin family. Just days earlier, Jamie Raskin's 25-year-old son, Tommy, died by suicide. He was a student at Harvard Law School. Raskin writes about these events in his new memoir titled Unthinkable Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. There's also a new documentary about Congressmember Jamie Raskin titled Love and the Constitution, airing Sunday night on MSNBC. This is the film's trailer.
Some of our members started to say, Trump's not worth it, the president's not worth it. The question is whether the Constitution is worth it. I know one thing really well, which is about the Constitution and the rule of law in American democracy. It's like everybody knows one thing, and my turn came up. I did not know whether I would be able to do anything again of meaning or substance in my life. Voltaire said, anyone who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
Tommy was a person who loved the world and he loved democracy. I feel like I honor him by doing the work that he'd be proud of.
The trailer to Love and the Constitution, directed by Madeline Carter, who began work on the documentary in 2018. Carter was filming inside Congressmember Jamie Raskin's home on election night 2020 and captured this moment when he spoke with his son Tommy as results came in.
Tom, hey. Are you staying up or are you going to sleep?
He is losing votes in the crucial Milwaukee suburb.
I don't think so. I'd be willing to put money on it.
Then I think it's going to be difficult for him to win the state of Wisconsin.
Hey, yeah, I'll bet you.
It's a win-win for me because if Trump wins, I get money.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Also in North Carolina now.
All right, love you, kiddo.
He's going to be in a lot of trouble.
Right.
Because
my kids are so freaked out that Trump might win. Everybody's so freaked out.
Different than Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
I mean, it's going to be a long night. I mean, Trump is going to be suing. We're going to win this narrowly, and then Trump is going to be fighting it every step along the way. I mean,
just talk about
buckle up.
It can't land.
I mean, we'll be fighting about this until we get into the new Congress. We'll be fighting about it until January 6th.
Congressmember Jamie Raskin speaking on election night 2020 in a clip from Love and the Constitution. Trump's efforts to overturn the election would soon begin. In the documentary, Raskin goes on to talk about Trump's efforts to overturn the election.
The country is still just trying to absorb the emotional impact of events that brought us right up to the edge of a real coup in America. We can't have healing before we have an honest reckoning, and this president must be held accountable for the role he has played.
We'll be joined by the film's director, Madeline Carter, later in the program. But first, we go to Tacoma Park, Maryland, to speak with Congressmember Jamie Raskin. He's represented Maryland's 8th congressional district since 2017. He's also married to Sarah Bloom Raskin, who's been nominated by President Biden to become the top banking regulator at the Federal Reserve and underwent serious grilling yesterday. Congressmember Jamie Raskin, welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us.
It's great to be with you, Amy, and thank you for having me.
So the name of your book is Unthinkable, Trauma, Truth, and the Unthinkable Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. You were the lead impeachment manager in President Trump's second impeachment trial. You're a member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection, which is where I want to start, actually, even before January 6th, because you were right there in the House when the attack took place. And I want to take this sequentially, how this went. I mean, you were already reeling, even if that hadn't happened, because your son, Tommy, and I want to offer my condolences to your whole family, because I haven't had a chance to talk to you personally in this last year, took his own life on New Year's Eve. So you were there with your family, some members, your daughter, and now your son-in-law. And you decided to go January 6th for the certification of the vote because it was that important to you. Can you talk about that moment? Can you talk about those days and what happened next?
Well, it was, of course, a constitutional responsibility for me to be there, for the whole Congress to be there. It's in the 12th Amendment that the first Wednesday in January, Congress meets in joint session just to receive the Electoral College votes. We knew that Trump was doing everything in his power to try to overturn the election, as he said just this last weekend. First they were in a relatively legitimate sphere when they went to more than 60 different courts, federal and state courts, to allege electoral fraud and corruption. And every court rejected their claims. That's what creates a comprehensive documentary record that their whole attack on the election, the big lie, is based on a tissue of propaganda and nonsense. But then they escalated into increasingly illegitimate things, trying to get the state legislatures to void the popular vote and substitute in Trump Electoral College slates, then going to election officials, several dozen of them, most prominently Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, to try to intimidate them and browbeat them into concocting a victory for Trump, making up votes. In that case, just find me 11,780 votes. And from there, he moved to the plan, which they ended up not going forward with because they couldn't get any department to cooperate, but they wanted to seize the election machinery. And from there, the attack was on Michael Flynn. And this was something that we had predicted, that they would try to get Flynn to announce extra constitutional powers outside of the Constitution, to unilaterally reject and repudiate Electoral College votes coming in from the states, specifically Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. So Speaker Pelosi had tasked me and a few other members with the job of getting ready to answer the objections to particular, the receipt of particular Electoral College votes. And, as I described in the book, Amy, basically we had prepared for everything except for a violent insurrection overrunning the House and the Senate.
Now, it's not like... Congressmember Raskin, it's not like you didn't have a warning. Well, I want to go back to another clip from the new MSNBC documentary, Love and the Constitution, beginning with Donald Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, testifying in Congress in 2019.
Given my experience working for Mr. Trump, I fear that if he loses the election in 2020, that there will never be a peaceful transition of power. And this is why I agreed to appear before you today.
Michael Cohen did issue a stark warning to the country that if Donald Trump lost, there would be no peaceful transition. There's no way he would accept it. That is a frightening and startling thing for the president's own lawyer to say about him. But it seemed far off at that point to a lot of people. And people have said from the beginning, there's no way he would do that. There's no way anybody would do that.
So that is Congressmember Jamie Raskin. And at the end, you're shaking the hand of Mr. Cohen. But you didn't quite believe what he was saying. Is that right?
No, actually, when I looked at some of the footage that Mads Carter had filmed. I was saying, there's some other parts of the movie where I was saying there will be violence all the way up till January 6th. And I was sort of amazed that I kept predicting that. But what I hadn't predicted was that it would be so overwhelming that we wouldn't be able to stop it. I mean, the image, when Tabitha and Hank decided to come with me, and of course we were all absolutely devastated on January 6th because we had buried Tommy on January the 5th in a COVID-19, funeral where we could only have 20 people there. And when they decided to come with me, they said, well, will we be okay? Because Donald Trump is telling his people to come to Washington. And I said, of course we'll be all right. We'll be inside the Capitol. And the image I had in my mind, Amy, was of June the 2nd, when Black Lives Matter had a protest at the Capitol. And there was this huge phalanx of National Guardsmen and women holding, bayonets and weapons on the steps of the Capitol. And that was immediately the image that came to mind. That was the day after Trump and William Barr had unleashed that paramilitary police riot against protesters in Lafayette Square. And essentially, what I hadn't seen was that we would not be militarily prepared sufficiently to defend the Capitol building, the House and the Senate, and that there would be this band of violent extremists, white nationalists, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, militiamen. There were Aryan nations there that came to lead the mob and smashed out our windows and began the assault on the police officers. And that was the part that was not foreseen. I mean, like most members of Congress, I was walking around with the assurance in my mind that if one person tried to evade the metal detectors and to run into the Capitol, they would be shot on sight. And we were overrun by more than 900 rioters who came in. And like Lindsey Graham said that day, we all could have died because any one of them could have had a bomb. And we're lucky that the Secret Service at Trump's rally were checking people for weapons, because that's why most of the extremists left their arms back in the car or back in the hotel or motel because they were going to that rally. But had they not, it could have been a very different situation, and there would have been a lot more deaths than there were. I mean, it was a deadly riot as it was, but that riot surrounded an insurrection, and that insurrection surrounded, of course, a coup whose details are surfacing now through our investigation.
And I want to talk about those details, but you were separated from your daughter Tabitha and from Hank, now your son-in-law, right, because you were on the floor of the House. Talk about where you went and your fear for them, where they went.
Well, Hank, by the way, was my son-in-law then. He had eloped in a COVID-19 wedding with our daughter, Hannah. He's married to our older daughter, and they had an Elvis Presley wedding out in Nevada. But they'd come in they wanted to see me speak, which was nice. And they saw the speeches that I was giving, defending the Electoral College count and explaining what our constitutional role was. We were not there to pick the president. We were simply there to receive the Electoral College votes from the states as they had been cast essentially by the people of the states. But after that was over, they wanted to go back to Steny office. Steny Hoyer had offered his Capitol Hill office, and they went back there. And so when we were overrun and the siege began, I was separated from them, and they were with my chief of staff, Julie Tagan. They barricaded themselves in the Steny's office. They locked the door, and then they pushed all the furniture up against the door. And Tabitha and Hank were hiding under a desk for a few hours while people were pounding on the door, and they could hear the riot taking place outside.
And yet you have so many denying what took place, even though they themselves were threatened like you were. I want to talk about the latest developments and what you think is the most significant revelations to come out of your committee right now. Those who have testified, those who haven't. Vice President Pence has not yet testified, but Mark Short, his chief of staff, has testified, we've learned. Not to mention others, for example, example. We'll talk about what happened this week. You had testimony from a prison.
Yeah, we did.
Can you talk about this?
Well, as I was saying, I view it as taking place in three rings of activity, and each one is fascinating and important to understand in its own respect. I mean, there was a mass demonstration for a wild protest called by Donald Trump that turned into a riot. And so that's a very important thing for us to understand, how a demonstration became a riot and how a crowd became a mob, and the role that social media played in that. The realm of the insurrection with the domestic violent extremist groups, how they were coordinated and what kinds of contacts they had with the immediate political entourage surrounding Donald Trump. But at the very red hot core of it was the realm of the coup. And it's a strange word to use in American political parlance because we don't have a lot of experience with coups in our own country. And we think of a coup as something taking place against a president, but this was a coup orchestrated by the president against the vice president and against the Congress in order to overthrow the normal constitutional order and the workings of our electoral process, to seize the presidency for another 4 years. And from everything I've seen so far, I'm convinced that Donald Trump was absolutely hell-bent on staying in office. This was not some kind of accidental, improvisational thing that got out of control at a big demonstration. No, this was methodical and organized, and they really were depending on Mike Pence just to negate these electoral college votes, which of course he had no power to do, but that would have activated under the 12th Amendment a so-called contingent election where we would move as the House of Representatives to vote immediately a new president in. And you ask, well, why would they want the House to be voting with Speaker Pelosi in charge? Well, under the 12th Amendment, we're not voting one member, one vote. We're voting one state, one vote. And after the 2020 elections, they knew well. They had 27 state delegations in the House. We had 22. Pennsylvania was tied right down the middle. Even had they lost the at-large representative from Wyoming's vote, Liz Cheney's vote, as I think they would have, they still would have had 26 votes. They would have moved immediately under the terms of the 12th Amendment for a vote. They kept talking about, well, returning the votes to the states, letting the states, giving them time, giving them weeks and months. I think they understood there would have been an immediate vote in the House of Representatives, and they would have declared victory for Trump. He likely would have invoked the Insurrection Act and declared martial law, as his disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was urging him to do. And he would have called in the National Guard that had been held at bay for several hours over the course of the rioting to come in and put down the insurrectionary chaos he had unleashed against us. And he would have pronounced himself a hero for doing that. And I think we were very close to that having happened. And any number of things could have gone in a number of different directions that would have led to that outcome. And anything could have happened there with an insurrection and a coup. There could have been civil war in the country.
So what did you learn this week about the founder and leader of the far-right Oath Keepers, the militia group, who appeared from prison? He's facing sedition charges, and Stuart Rhodes. What did he testify, and what connections do you believe he has to either Trump or Trump's inner circle?
Well, I'm afraid I can't answer that, Amy. Forgive me. We haven't released that transcript yet. The chair's not made the decision to do that. So we can't talk about the details of specific interviews and depositions until the committee's made them public.
I want to bring Madeline Carter into this conversation, the director of the documentary that's going to be airing on MSNBC at 10 o'clock Eastern on Sunday night. Following the life and political journey of Congressmember Jamie Raskin. Madeline, can you talk about when you decided to do this film?
I spent months trying to convince Jamie to do this film. And I think I started trying to convince him in January of 2018. And I didn't start filming till July 4th of 2018.
And what was most important to you then? In fact, Congressmember Raskin is your congressmember.
That is true. Well, what had happened is that on the same day, same month, January of 2017, Donald Trump became my president and Jamie Raskin became my congressman. And literally from the early weeks, Jamie became a Trump gadfly. And I watched Jamie as he was valiantly trying to bring the public light to Trump's endless atrocities and lawbreaking. And so about a year into both of their terms, I thought I'd really like to make a film about Jamie kind of holding up democracy against Trump.
I want to go back to another clip of your film, Love and the Constitution.
Why is America such an extraordinary country? We are not unified by virtue of being one ethnicity or one ideology or one religion. We're unified by one constitution and one rule of law, and then the values under our Constitution. It is an aspiration. It's a challenge to us. The Constitution shouldn't be some kind of fetish document. It should be the living commitment that we all have to make democracy work in service of the common good.
There you have a clip of the film Love and the Constitution. How did your film change over these just few years? You've been working on this now for 4 years, from when you started to what it has become.
It changed radically. I mean, when I started, Mueller and his team had been investigating for about a year. And I and many others expected that the Mueller report would come out some point in the summer or fall of 2018. And I expected that that would lead to the House Judiciary Committee investigating and impeaching Trump. And Jamie, of course, was on the House Judiciary Committee. So when I started out, I thought I was going to make a 1-year film, following the impeachment of Trump, sort of through the eyes of Jamie, who was on the House Judiciary Committee. But of course, things did not happen that way, and other things kept happening. So I just kept filming because I kept not having an ending.
But you ultimately did. I mean, at this point, what has happened January 6th, to say the least, has not been resolved.
That is true. And to this day, to tell you the truth, I wish I were still making the film and still following Jamie as he is working on the January 6th Select Committee, because but there may never be an ending to our Trump woes. So maybe I'll have to do a part 2.
I want to go to the final clip that we have from the film Love and the Constitution. This is Congressmember Raskin reflecting on the death of Tommy, his son, and the pandemic.
We were not the only family in that god-awful year to lose a family member. If you add up COVID-19, opioid deaths, gun violence, and all of the other normal causes, millions of people lost loved ones.
Amen.
We are indeed surrounded now by American carnage.
American carnage, which of course is echoing President Trump's inaugural address. Jamie Raskin, can you talk about what happened and how that has shaped all that you have done? It was incredibly brave of you, after losing your son, to move forward and be at the center of both the impeachment, the chief impeachment manager, and then, of course, chief Congress member on the January 6th Select Committee.
Well, I just felt that I had no choice. I felt Tommy was with me. He was in my heart. I felt him in my chest. And those were scary days because we didn't know which way things were going. I mean, the extreme right websites were continuing to agitate for finishing the job. There were death threats flying all over the place. And I felt then, as I do now, that democracy is on the line and in danger. And, for most of the history of our species, people have lived under kings and queens and bullies like Donald Trump. Democracy, as Lincoln said, is a very fragile experiment. And, every generation's got to ask whether government of the people, by the people, and for the people is going to perish from the earth, because it could very easily do that. And the enemies of democracy all over the world, including in America, including people like Steve Bannon, are agitating for the destruction of democracy, or what they call the deep state based on government by the people, as opposed to dictators and would-be dictators like Donald Trump. So,
Are we going to see Donald Trump come before the committee, and are we going to see public hearings? I mean, can you talk about how the Watergate hearings affected you and how significant they were for the country, and what it would mean to have the same thing today around January 6th?
Well, the Watergate hearings had a cleansing effect on at least the psyche of the country. I don't know that it fully dislodged all of the structures of power that had been mobilized against democracy, but we have to have hearings that give people the truth. My dad used to say that democracy needs a ground to stand on, and that ground is the truth. So the people have to be aware of exactly what took place so we can fortify our institutions and our processes against the next coup, against the next violent insurrection. People understand the way that Donald Trump exploited these domestic violent extremist groups, these white nationalist groups, but they exploited him too. They used him. I mean, when they had their Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in August of 2017, they could only muster together 500 people. They were much more isolated. And then after several years of Trump and Trump's own organizing for January 6th, they were several thousand at the front of a march of 40 or 50,000 people. And they almost knocked over the government of the United States. And, if you look at what they say, their only regret is they didn't bring all of their guns with them, and they left them back in their hotel and motel rooms.
Jamie, what concerns do you have for the upcoming elections? The New York Times recently reported that nearly 24 Republicans who've publicly questioned or disputed the 2020 election results are running for secretaries of state across the country.
Well, Trump and his forces clearly want to seize the electoral apparatus. So they will be the ones making all of the decisions about which votes count and which votes don't count. It's not only an obvious plan, it's an explicit plan on their part. I mean, one of my colleagues, Jody Heiss from Georgia, is leaving the Congress of the United States to run for Secretary of State in Georgia to oust Raffensperger, who they, of course, accuse of disloyalty to the Trump regime. So that's where we are right now. So we can't fight the last battle alone. We got to fight the last battle too. We got to fortify the Congress and the presidential electoral process the best we can. But we've got to be fighting in every state to try to defend the neutral administration of the election laws and traditions of nonpartisan or at least bipartisan election administration, which they want to replace with partisan election administration. And in some places, they just want the state legislature in Republican hands to be controlling the election. So we've got to deal with that threat, which is an overwhelming one, as well as do whatever we can to defend the right to vote, even though they have used the filibuster as one of their anti-democratic instruments to prevent us from passing voting rights legislation. So what we've got really is the will of the majority. Remember, Hillary beat him by 3 million votes. Joe Biden beat him by 7.5 million votes. And our numbers are growing. And it's the will of the majority versus a bag of tricks that they've got: the voter suppression, the gerrymandering of our districts, manipulation of the Electoral College, and planting booby traps throughout it, and then just stealing elections, which is what this whole attack on election administration is all about.
Finally, Congressmember Raskin, could you comment on the hearing yesterday around your wife being confirmed to the Federal Reserve? The Washington Post described Sarah Bloom Raskin as championed by Democrats eager to install a bank regulator with a focus on climate change, criticized by Republicans who don't believe climate change belongs in conversations about the financial system or economic stability. It was a serious grilling in the Senate Banking Committee.
Right. And, well, let's just say this. I wasn't there, and I had some hearings of my own, so I only caught parts of it. But Sarah has been unanimously or near unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate in bipartisan fashion twice as a governor of the Federal Reserve Board and also as Deputy Secretary of the United States Treasury. So none of this is about her qualifications to serve, obviously, because the Senate itself has approved and confirmed her 2 times before. All of this is about things that she has said or written about climate change. She has said, of course, that she will follow the law and act completely within the dual mandate of the Fed. But what they're attacking is the idea that there can be citizens who are fully aware of climate change, who take it seriously, who can serve honorably and lawfully in other capacities. It's just an outrageous attack on her qualifications, of course, but she's tough. But on just the idea that you can even be cognizant of climate change and serve in different governmental functions. It's an amazing thing.
Well, Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, husband of Sarah Bloom Raskin, member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection, lead impeachment manager in President Trump's second impeachment trial. Jamie Raskin's new book is Unthinkable Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. I also want to end by asking Madeline Carter, the director of the new MSNBC documentary Love and the Constitution, which is premiering Sunday night, what you want people to take away from and why you named the film Love and the Constitution.
Well, what I want people to take away is that one person can make a difference. I mean, Jamie is making a huge difference in democracy and in saving constitutional democracy. But one person can make a difference just by driving a neighbor to the polls. So there's plenty of work to be done by all of us. So that's my main message. And then in terms of naming it Love in the Constitution, I actually thought of that title at about 2 a.m. One morning in October, because that really describes what the film is about. The film is about Jamie's love for his son, obviously, but Jamie's love for the Constitution and for American democracy is really what's helping him get through this terrible, life-changing loss of Tommy.
I want to thank you so much for being with us, Madeline Carter, and congratulations on this film. Again, it will appear on MSNBC 10 Eastern Time on Sunday night and then move on to Peacock. This is Democracy Now! Next up, we go to Chicago, where protests erupted Thursday over the early release of the ex-police officer Jason Van Dyke, who murdered 17-year-old Laquan McDonald in 2014, shooting him to death 16 times. Stay with us.